From these concessions to the weakness of humanity we now pass to the Stoic paradoxes, where we shall see their doctrine in its full rigor. It is perhaps these very paradoxes which account for the puzzled fascination with which Stoicism affected the mind of antiquity, just as obscurity in a poet may prove a surer passport to fame than more strictly poetical merits. The root of Stoicism being a paradox, it is not too surprising that the offshoots should be so too. To say that virtue is the highest good is a proposition to which everyone who aspires to the spiritual life must yield assent with his lips, even if he has not yet learnt to believe it in his heart. But alter it into virtue is the only good, and by that slight change it becomes at once the teeming mother of paradoxes. By a paradox is meant that which runs counter to general opinion. Now it is quite certain that men have regarded, do regard, and we may safely add, will regard things as good which are not virtue. But if we grant this initial paradox, a great many others will follow along with it, as for instance, that virtue is sufficient of itself for happiness. The 5th book of Cicero's Tusculan Disputations is an eloquent defense of this thesis, in which the orator combats the suggestion that a good man is not happy when he is being broken on the wheel. Another glaring paradox of the Stoics is that all faults are equal. They took their stand upon a mathematical conception of rectitude. An angle must be either a right angle or not, a line must be either straight or crooked. So an act must be either right or wrong. There is no mean between the two, and there are no degrees of either. To sin is to cross the line. When once that has been done, it makes no difference to the offence how far you go. Trespassing at all is forbidden. This doctrine was defended by the Stoics on account of its bracing moral effect, as showing the heinousness of sin. Horace gives the judgment of the world in saying that common sense and morality, to say nothing of utility, revolt against it. Here are some other specimens of the Stoic paradoxes. Every fool is mad. Only the sage is free, and every fool is a slave. The sage alone is wealthy. Good men are always happy, and bad men always miserable. All goods are equal. No one is wiser or happier than another. But may not one man, we ask, be more nearly wise or more nearly happy than another? That may be, the Stoics would reply, but the man who is only one state from Canopus is as much not in Canopus as the man who is 100 stades off, and the 8-day-old puppy is still as blind as on the day of its birth. Nor can a man who is near the surface of the sea breathe any more than if he were full 500 fathom down. In so far as the above paradoxes do not depend upon a metaphorical use of language, they all seem traceable to 3 initial assumptions: the identification of happiness with virtue, of virtue with reason, and the view taken of reason as something absolute, not admitting of degrees, something which is either present in its entirety or not at all. There was no play of light and shadow in the Stoic landscape, for they had done away with the clouds of passion. They could not allow that these more or less obscured the rays of reason, having refused to admit that there was a difference of nature between the clouds and the sunlight, passion, according to them, being only reason gone wrong. It is only fair to the Stoics to add that paradoxes were quite the order of the day in Greece, though they greatly outdid other schools in producing them. Socrates himself was the father of paradox. Epicurus maintained as staunchly as any Stoic that no wise man is unhappy, and if he be not belied, went the length of declaring that the wise man, if put into the bull of Phalaris, would exclaim, "How delightful! How little I mind this!" It is out of keeping with common sense to draw a hard and fast distinction between good and bad, yet this was what the Stoics did. They insisted on effecting here and now that separation between the sheep and the goats which Christ postponed to the day of judgment. Unfortunately, when it came to practice, all were found to be goats, so that the division was a merely formal one. It approves itself, says Stobaeus, "to Zeno and the Stoic philosophers who came after him, that there are two kinds of men, one good, the other bad. The good all their life display the virtues, and the bad the vices. Whence one kind are always right in all that they purpose, the other always wrong. And inasmuch as the good avail themselves of the arts of life in their conduct, they do all things well, as doing them wisely and temperately and in accordance with the other virtues; whereas the bad, on the contrary, do all things ill. The good are great and well grown and tall and strong; great, because they are able to attain the objects which they set on before themselves, and which are dependent on their own will; well grown, because they find increase from every quarter; tall, because they have reached the height which befits a noble and good man; and strong, because they are endowed with the strength that befits them. The good man is not to be vanquished or cast in a combat, seeing that he is neither compelled by anyone, nor does he compel another; he is neither hindered, nor does he hinder; he is neither forced by anyone, nor does he himself force any man. He neither does ill, nor is himself done ill to, nor falls into ill, nor is deceived, nor deceives another, nor is he mistaken or ignorant, nor does he forget, nor entertain any false supposition, but is happy in the highest degree, and fortunate, and blessed, and wealthy, and pious, and beloved of God, and worthy of everything, fit to be a king, or general, or statesman, and versed in the arts of managing a household and making money. Whereas the bad have all the attributes that are opposite to these, and generally to the virtuous belong all good things, and to the bad all evils." The good man of the Stoics was variously known as the sage or the serious man, the latter name being inherited from the Peripatetics. We used to hear it said among ourselves that a person had become serious when he or she had taken to religion. Another appellation which the Stoics had for the sage was the urbane man, while the fool in contradistinction was called a boor. Boorishness was defined as an experience of the customs and laws of the state. By the state was meant not Athens or Sparta, as would have been the case in a former age, but the society of all rational beings, into which the Stoics spiritualized the state. The sage alone had the freedom of the city, and the fool was therefore not only a boor, but an alien or an exile. In this city justice was natural and not conventional, for the law by which it was governed was the law of right reason. The law then was spiritualized by the Stoics just as the state was. It no longer meant the enactments of this or that community, but the mandates of the eternal reason which ruled the world, and which would prevail in the ideal state. Law was defined as right reason commanding what was to be done, and forbidding what was not to be done. As such, it in no way differed from the impulse of the sage himself. As a member of a state, and by nature subject to law, man was essentially a social being. Between all the wise there existed unanimity, which was a knowledge of the common good, because their views of life were harmonious. Fools, on the other hand, whose views of life were discordant, were enemies to one another and bent on mutual injury. As a member of society, the sage would play his part in public life. Theoretically this was always true, and practically he would do so, wherever the actual constitution made any tolerable approach to the ideal type. But if the circumstances were such as to make it certain that his embarking on politics would be of no service to his country, and only a source of danger to himself, then he would refrain. The kind of constitution of which the Stoics most approved was a mixed government, containing democratic, aristocratic, and monarchical elements. Where circumstances allowed, the sage would act as legislator, and would educate mankind; one way of doing which was by writing books which would prove of profit to the reader.